Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm glad to see some familiar faces. Only familiar faces this time. I'm going to quickly introduce myself for the people who are watching online. I'm Robin, 21 years old. I'm from the Netherlands. This is going to be my second lecture on video, and you've already seen several of my lectures. So, welcome today. Mastering the middle game. Today I want to discuss perhaps my favorite game, and the first question is very simple. Before we get started, how do you play the perfect game as black? And you know, you might think that's a subjective question and there's not a clear answer, but to me there's a pretty clear answer. So does anyone have a suggestion? How do you play the perfect game as black? You want to prevent all white's threats? That's part of it, surely, but it's easier than that. You need to play the King's Indian. Not so difficult. That's the first thing you need to do. I mean, like I said, it's a slightly subjective opinion, but in my personal opinion as a professional chess player, you need to play the King's Indian to get the perfect game going. Now, I've been a King's Indian player for a couple years, I would say, and what I love most of all about this opening is that you can play it against c4, d4, knight f3, and you just have a whole repertoire against so many different moves that you might struggle with if you play the Grunfeld or the Slav. No real move order issues there. So previously I had a lecture in which I beat Ding Liren. I showed my game in which I won against him, and that was not very nice of me because normally I wouldn't beat a player of that caliber. So today I'm going to explain a little bit why I actually showed that game. It's because Ding Liren is one of my favorite players, and the reason for that is that I think, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, even though he's not a pure King's Indian player anymore, he's one of the few stars who really rose playing this opening and just doing an amazing job. And this game specifically, to me, made such a big impression that when this was played in Chengdao Open 2011 against Levan Pantsulaia, I was just very happy about the opening I just picked. I was a Grandmaster. I was just becoming a Grandmaster at the time, or I just turned a Grandmaster. And I saw this game and I was like, yes, this is the opening for me. And I'm glad that I've been studying this. So what we're going to do, it's going to be a quiz format. Some of you are already familiar with that, but basically we're going to go to several critical positions. I'm going to offer you 3 different choices. And I suggest that people online also take part if you pause the video or something like that. And we're going to discuss either the right move, or preferably, if we have time, all of the moves shortly. And through doing that, we're going to go through the entire game. So let's start off. So like I said, the King's Indian, he's playing knight f3, c4. We don't know exactly what he wants, but we're playing King's Indian. We don't really have to worry about it. So he goes for the g3 variation. And this is a position that I play quite regularly with black. I play the move a6, which was also played in the game. This is the Panno variation. And in this game, or in this position, white has several options at its disposal. You can go b3. Recently, bishop to f4 is very popular. h3 is a move. But the main line is d5. And what I'm not sure whether what I'm about to say is correct, but what I think is the case is that this variation was not so popular anymore after this specific game. At least after seeing this game from the black side, I would no longer go for this line if this was in my white repertoire. Okay, so knight to a5, knight to d2, white protects the c4 pawn, and c5. This is really kind of a tabia, like this is where all the games go. Black plays c5, of course he needed to prevent b4. And now basically what the problem is that we're stuck with this, let's say arguably weak knight on a5. It's not very well placed, but we have some play on the queen side. Some of you may have seen games here, rook to b8, b5, etc. And the first question is actually as early as here. This is actually a mainline position that I'm about to ask you about. So I'm going to give you 3 options. We have rook to b8, preparing b5. We have e6 playing in the center. And we have b5 immediately. I'm gonna give you 2-3 minutes. It's really more of a matter of taste more than anything, so think about this for a second.
Sorry, what were the moves again?
Rook to b8, b5, and e6. Okay, it's really an intuitive decision at this point. So has everyone been able to make up their mind? All right, which moves do we have in mind? Who wants to play rook to b8 first of all? Okay, 2. b5.
I think that's what he played, but I don't want to play it.
Okay. It's very stubborn as usual. And e6. So e6? Okay. Well, we have really divided groups over here. So first of all, rook to b8 is the main line. So if you choose rook b8, there's nothing wrong with your pick. e6, I'm not a huge fan of. We can have a quick look. Let's say e6, b3, takes. We get kind of a Benoni position over here. This is what you were aiming for. b5, bishop to b2. And I personally don't like the fact that he's been able to put the bishop here. Even though we've been able to expand on the queen side, we don't really have targets over here. Normally, black would aim to play b4, let's say. If we go b4 now, then most likely white's gonna regroup, something like this, and immediately get back to the c4 square. So, of course, it's not really a huge advantage for white, but by theory, it's considered to be slightly better, this position. So e6 is playable. It's not the best move. Rook to b8 is the main line, and as you can probably guess by now, he played b5. That's correct. So, rook to b8, why is it that I don't like this move? Well, it has to do everything with what I pointed out earlier. I don't like the knight on a5. The main line over here runs b3, b5, bishop to b2. And really what black is hoping for is something related to tactics against the c4 pawn, maybe a potential sacrifice on b2. But somehow it feels wrong to me that we're playing on the side of the board where our worst placed piece is on a5. And if white manages to consolidate this position, and of course there have been Kasparov games and great players going for this, they play something like e5 here, and it's very complicated. But at the end of the day, fundamentally, I just don't like this position, because if white plays it well, my knight is never going to be truly an active piece. You can imagine if it's not working out on a5, it might have to go back to b7 one day. And well, nobody likes to have the knight on b7 in this position. So it's really more of a mindset thing than something concrete. As a King's Indian player, I prefer more dynamic positions. And Ding Liren in this game goes for b5, which at the time really wasn't known to be a very good move. So let's see, what did he have in mind? Because clearly he played this with some preparation, with some ideas which went a little further than the theory at the time said. So, next question. Very good. You've lost a pawn. What do we do next? Do we play bishop to a6? This is very much in like Benko Gambit style, where the bishop usually goes to a6. Do we play queen to b6? Develop the queen and leave the the faith of the bishop undecided for now? Or do we play bishop to b7, putting the pressure on d5? So again, 2-3 minutes, and we'll discuss the options. Okay, the main issue for me after bishop to b7 is that I simply don't know what to do after knight to c3, because the knight probably is going to go back to c3, and well, we cannot really attack the pawn another time, right? So why put the bishop on b7 basically? Queen b6 is the right move. Is there anyone who had another move? No?
You did.
Okay. Is there anything you...
I like bishop a6.
Okay. Bishop to a6 is fine, but after, let's say, knight to c3...
I like having the bishop on the long diagonal there.
Okay. Very good point, because it's not so clear at all. What I'm saying, once again, is very general. So that brings us to the next question. Queen to b6 was played. Knight to c3 is the most logical move after a4. What is the problem with a4 over here? Is there a problem? Once again, the Banco Gambit is not, even though it might have a sort of a name as a very tactical opening, a lot of it is positional ideas. Really the idea here is that if I go bishop to d7 now, for example, knight to c3 back, you're a bit stuck here. Imagine I go rook to b8. What you would like to do is somehow develop this bishop on c1, right? Well, we see a hole on b3. We would like to play b3, but okay, maybe we cannot even take it immediately. I think we probably can, because there's ideas with knight to d4 later, something like this, for example. Although the tactics have not been very good for me recently, but I think something like this works. So we see this hole on b3, and if we go back to knight to c3, my question, first of all, is what's white's main setup here? This is not only in this position, but in this position it makes even more sense than in the normal Banco Gambit. Given that the knight's on a5, if you could make, let's say, 2-3 moves with white, which moves do you play? Yep. b3, bishop to b2 again. b3, limiting this knight, bishop to b2 is nice. And one thing that we always want to watch out for when we play b3 is that black doesn't play c4 and get counterplay. So preferably something with the rook on b1, for example, so that when he plays c4, we either have the rook already looking towards the black queen, or we can play b4, which is really our ideal, right? Because then again, knight to b7, that's normally not good for black. So exactly, b3, bishop to b2, and you will find that in the Banco Gambit line where white plays with g3, not the main line, but this is also the main idea. With the knight on a5, it's even more obvious. So, next question. Every single move is a question. Now we really come to your point. Do we go bishop to a7? Do we go bishop to d7? Or do we play bishop to f5? Again, a couple of minutes. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to ask. I knew that question was coming. Bishop to f5, bishop to d7, bishop to a6.
Isn't it supposed to be over there? Why don't you just...
Okay. Bishop to a6. 1, very good. Bishop to d7. 1, 2. Bishop to f5.
Yeah, I did.
Okay, you're still stuck with bishop a6. Okay, okay. Great.
He's gotta do it.
Right. Okay, so no, okay, that's fine. Let's go to your move first, bishop to a6. So imagine I go rook to b1 now. Let's play a couple moves over here. No, because really bishop to a6 is one of the most natural moves in the position. Okay, the thing about playing c4 before I have played b3, or really anything that you can attack, is that I might just not go b3 at all anymore. So I'm going to play, for example, knight to f3. I'm considering to go e4 sometimes. It depends how easily you have access to this square, right? If you can jump like this, or even better with your b7 knight, I will probably not do it. But the bigger issue here is that, and I'm just going to make a couple sample moves to try and prove my point. If I get my knight to d4 and to c6, things can get very unpleasant. So imagine something like this. You're happy, you're getting to c5, but what's next? Not so clear, right? I mean, there might be tricks, there might be knight d3, but if white controls this position, play something like h3, bishop e3, slowly knight to c6. It's really us who gave away more important squares more than anything. And last but not least, we still have to take into account b4 and b3 at all times. So playing c4 is nice, it gives us more space, but it also, well, most of all, it gives away the d4 square, right? So c4, it's not really a move I would recommend playing. Right, so maybe c4 after he plays b3, so let's play rook to b8, right? This is the position that Ding Liren probably thought about before he came to this game, before he prepared his opening line, this type of position. The game Geller against Vladimirov, 1958. I was just reading this, by the way, I don't know that. But what I do know is that, again, you want to play c4. Now what I was talking about earlier happens. b4, Knight to b7, well, we see that we're being dominated, right? b5, I think, immediately loses a piece, but the problem is really that unless white's playing bishop to b2 at the wrong moment, and then we can play c4, we get some activity, it's going to be very hard to come up with a plan here. Now, this is something that maybe some of the good Volga players or Bangkok Gambit players will disagree with. They'll say this is fine, this is playable, but most players don't like these positions for black. So that's the reason bishop to a6 is not such a great move. It really puts us in a typical Volga Gambit position. I would say even with the knight on a5, it's a little worse than that. Now, who had bishop to d7? Bishop to d7 is also, again, it's actually facing the same type of issue. Rook to b1, rook to b8, b3. You could build a case that the bishop is better on d7. You could say it's worse. I'm not quite sure. I just don't see how we're dealing with the same issue over here. So that leads us to the game. Yes?
Well, I thought after bishop f5 there's e4, but maybe that's not so good because then you have a hole in d3.
Okay. Well, you know, I'm always there with a nice question for you to answer. So bishop to f5 was played, e4, and here you are with your next question. Very nice, right? I mean, Robin comes to the lecture, he's like, hey guys, let's give away a pawn, it's great, it's good, and then he lets you answer all the questions yourself. But this is the next question, e4. And believe me, we're not going to go through every single move with a new question, but this is just a very important stage of the game to understand how did this guy even improve on what was already known at the time. So e4, the logical move, we really have to play this as white. And now bishop to c8, bishop to d7 anyway, or bishop to g4. Bishop to g4 is a funny move, but you could maybe argue h3 or f3 are both slightly weakening. The bishop's active on g4 if he doesn't kick it away. Bishop d7, once again, it's an active square. And bishop c8, the last option. Okay. Bishop to d7. Bishop to c8. Bishop to g4. Okay, if you have bishop to g4 with the idea of going bishop c8 a move later, you've pretty much got the right idea, except that h3 is more of a useful move for white than anything else. Bishop to c8 is the right idea because what you already mentioned, the d3 square. And to prove my points, to really bring this back to the basics, we're going to go really quickly and compare this to a normal Volga gambit. So let's do this really quickly. Let's go to a normal Volga gambit. Why is this such a peculiar situation compared to what is the normal line? So let's have a look. The normal Volga gambit over here. If white decides to play with g3 over here, you will never see him play e4. And we are forced to take on a6 with our bishop, by theory. Now, if white does decide to play with e4, he pretty much exclusively plays it here and exchanges these bishops. So what is my point is that the bishop on a6 is actually very useful. If white decides to exchange it off much later by going bishop to f1 back, well, then let's start counting who lost more moves, right? And with the pawn on e4, as we'll see in the game, you really get into some troubles with white, some annoying decisions. So bishop to c8 was played, very good for those who found it. The idea is to go to a6, finally. And white played h3. Now h3 to me is a very logical move, because knight to g4 is very often an annoying idea. Oh. Knight to g4 is annoying because there's also bishop to d4. So not only is the knight moving to e5, there is also perhaps bishop to d4 attacking f2, and normally this rook wants to move at some point, especially when the bishop is coming to a6. So h3 is an understandable move to me. Bishop to a6, rook to d1, and if you're very clever, you may have seen the answer. I hope not. 3 moves again. How do we play this position, guys? Rook to b8, pay attention. Rook to b8, knight to c4, or knight to d7.
Wait, which rook? The F rook?
Yes. Rook to b8, knight to c4, knight to d7. Again, they're all logical moves, but one is better than the other. All of them are moves that you would like to play. But which one first? Knight to d7, really, everyone?
I honestly have
Rook b8?
idea.
Okay, the point is really that the difference between rook b8 and knight to d7 is quite, small. Knight to c4 would not be a very good idea because of knight to a4. Not so hard. I mean, if we're moving over here, then I think we're getting pins, if I'm not mistaken. So, not the best move. And rook to b8 is for sure we want to play this move. It's part of our setup. Knight to d7 to me is slightly better because we're keeping this, or actually we're introducing this idea of knight to e5, bishop to d3 right away. Whereas with the rook b8, he doesn't immediately have to think about this. But in all fairness, the difference is very, very small. White plays knight to f3, because knight to e5 is really quite annoying. Black plays knight to c4 now. What is the idea if I go b3? That's kind of the move that we are always afraid of, right? Why can't he go b3?
I think you could trade the knights, or you can go back knight to e5.
Knight to e5 is fine, but it's not necessarily a huge achievement on our part. Imagine get something like this and he goes for rook b1 or bishop b2. Okay, even then, let's say bishop to b2. Maybe you can play c4. We'll change the bishops. I'll be a pawn up and we'll see if you can equalize it. The c3 knight, exactly. And what's the best way to do that? Queen a5, or maybe even more aggressive, queen to b4, right? And we see actually a legitimate problem over here. If we just take on c4, which is kind of the given move, because it's not so easy to protect against the threats here. If we take, then black is already much better because the a-pawn is also about to be lost. And for that reason, white played rook to b1. Queen to b4 anyway. Again, very clever. Good timing actually, because what happens after a3? Which is kind of the logical move here. Take the a3 pawn, exactly. Take the a3 pawn and we won our pawn back. This one is always weaker than the one on c5, and this is typically quite a lot better for black. Yeah? All right, so queen to b4, again, it's really annoying. We can't really move. We want to play b3, we can. We want to play a3, we can't. We'd like to go bishop d2, but who really wants to trade that bishop for our, the bad knight, basically. The knight came from a5 to c4, and our c1 bishop is virtually our best piece. So again, it all has its drawbacks. White decides to go for bishop to f1. Prefers to give perhaps the bishop on c4 under the right circumstances. Okay, now we finally play rook to b8. White decided to take, and play bishop to g5. Next question. So our e7 pawn is under attack. We can play f6. We can play king f8. Or we can play bishop takes c3. The nice positional bishop takes c3. So again, a couple of minutes. And when you make your decision, I also would like to have kind of a evaluation. Do you like black's position at this point, or do you feel like white is still pawn up and doing well? Okay, yes? You would play king f8. Who else wants to go king f8? King f8 is basically the positionally very sound way to defend e7, right? Because f6 we really don't want to play. If you had f6, unfortunately, not the right move. It's blocking your bishop, and yeah, it just doesn't do much for your position. King f8 is a good move because it retains most of the threats. Again, you're a pawn down, but really this is quite a successful Benko gambit. I mean, even if he goes knight to d2, for example, we can go queen d3. It's still very hard for white to move. We could think about doubling on the b file, increasing the pressure. Great. Who had a better move? Who had bishop takes c3? Nobody. Yes? Okay. So bishop takes c3 was played in the game. It's a very strong move. But it has a very tactical reason. What is the reason behind? Very good question. Why can't he take with the queen? If we take with the queen, we'll take on c3. And who is still sharp this late in the evening? Taking and bishop? Bishop e2, exactly. Bishop to e2. And these two are hanging. This is much better for black. You can also play f6 first to make sure he can't take on e7 at all. Bishop moves anywhere, basically, bishop to e2. And we're winning an exchange. We're going to win the a2 pawn as well. It's pretty much over. So we're forced to play b takes c3. And what's black's move now? Yeah? Queen e2. Exactly. In the same style, once again, if we take, bishop takes, we're losing material, right? So what we see, bishop takes c3, I wouldn't say it's very typical in these types of structures, but it's not completely abnormal either, because even if we do manage to, let's say, get a structure like this, very often if we, for example, can get our bishop to c4 or something like that, this a-pawn can just be lost very easily, right? It becomes very weak. So if white is forced to go b takes c3, you'd be surprised how often black has this opportunity to play bishop takes c3. Okay, queen to e2. Knight d2 is almost forced, because we need to protect the knight as well. Knight to e1, we would love to play, but it fails to the nice queen to f1 check, king h2, and bishop to e2. Rook is hanging, pawn is hanging. We see that suddenly things can get very tactical. We've made all these nice positional choices, and white has played a couple of odd moves, let's say. Suddenly it's full of tactics. That's really typical for the structure, I would say. You need to be able to do both. Knight to d2. Black played knight to e5. Another very nice move, introducing this idea of knight to f3, using the pin. White took on b8. Took on b8, played queen to a4. So the idea is that if we go bishop to b5, which looks very logical, he's going to pin us with queen to b3, and it's not so easy to get out of this. So maybe rook to b1 even on the next move, and let's say our initiative is put on a halt for now. Instead, black played f6. And again, I really like this concept with bishop takes c3 and f6 specifically, because as you can see, we're playing against this bishop over here. Of course, the position is very tactical, but the idea that our pawns are blocking his bishop, whereas our bishop is still absolutely free, able to go to d3, e2, all these nice squares, is again something that is worth keeping in mind, because it can give you even more compensation for your pawn. Bishop to e3. Now, it's pretty clear that black has a very serious initiative. We're still down a pawn, but if you're not happy with black's position at this point, it's probably not the right opening for you. So next question, bishop to d3, king to f7 or h5. h5 with the idea of h4, opening up the position a little bit. Bishop d3, well, clearly putting a lot more pressure, or specifically on the e-pawn. And king to f7, just kind of a useful move to safeguard the king a little bit more. If you've been doing very poorly, then this is your chance, because this is the last question.
That means black's gonna win soon.
Who knows? Maybe he blundered. Yeah, black won very soon after this. And black should win very soon after this, so make sure you get this move right. Everyone? Yeah? Okay, so perfect. Can someone tell me how to solve this position? Because what I like to do, especially when it comes to positions in which it's clear that I have to find quite precise moves, in which I'm building up an advantage. And I wouldn't say necessarily that here it's only time bound, but we still a pawn down. We don't want to give white too much time to recuperate from this position, maybe play rook a1, queen d1, try to get our queen out, and so on. So the question I would ask myself in this position is, which piece do I need to strengthen my attack as much as possible? Now, if you ask yourself this question, you would have come to the conclusion you should play king to f7. Not because you want to include your king into the attack, but because we want to play rook to b2, which is very logical. Rook to b2 just increases the pressure all over. It puts pressure on the a pawn, all kinds of threats. But we cannot play it right now. Check, and we're getting in trouble, right? Now, the other moves are decent too. It's just that I don't know exactly what my next move is over here, right? Who had bishop to d3? Okay, what is your next move? What's your idea? What is white going to play? Yeah, it's actually it's still not an easy position, of course. But okay, do I have time for something like bishop to f4, perhaps? Or is that already falling for some concrete trick?
Can I play knight f3?
Knight f3 check anyway, yeah. And rook to e1. Now I have some dreams, like maybe queen to d7, queen here, or something like that.
I wish the king stayed for then I could play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why you moved the king first.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I said, I think black still has a huge advantage after bishop d3, most likely. But it's not as conceptual as king f7. King f7...
King f7 seems like it also takes away all of white's attacks.
Exactly, all the counterplay related to queen e8 and so on, because really our rook is great on b8, but in order to finish this game we need it on b2. So rook to b2, king to f7 was played. White played queen c2, stopping rook b2. But now knight to f3 check, bishop d3. Look, these players at this level, of course they consider a move like knight to e1, but actually after taking again, we're much better, but let's say he's able to play c4. It's technically speaking not so different, not so easy here, because he sort of got rid of our most important attacking pieces. Our rook doesn't have easy entrance right now. So he goes bishop to d3 first. Queen goes back and just takes. A very nice way to round it up, because after bishop takes, we've got bishop takes e4 check, the queen's coming in. And here we see, of course, that opposite color bishops, they do give some attacking chances. They're not only drawish tools. After rook takes, what does black play? Queen f1 check, yeah, and exactly. After king h2, rook to b1. Again, we see how useful this move was. King f3, he actually resigned after this move, but king f3, something like check even, and picking up this pawn, it's almost mate already. So for example, king here, I guess you can easily take, and it should be a mate soon. So let's go through the game one more time, briefly, and see what exactly was so awesome about this game, because I really am a big fan of this game. I think for me, it really changed my perception of the whole Bangkok Gambit structure and how I look at it. First of all, the point of giving up a pawn, then losing a full tempo just to provoke e4, I think is very impressive. This is not the type of idea you're going to see, given by the computer or something like that. And really, I have a lot of respect for Ding Liren for coming up with such a concept. Then following up very nicely, bishop to a6, knight to d7, knight e5, and we saw that actually later on his point was completely proven when, arguably, of course, white can play better, but it was really proven when white was playing this move bishop to f1 later on. What is really important to remember if you go in and play this type of position is that it's all about b3 rook and bishop to b2. If you're playing this as black and white can safely do this, and maybe in combination with rook to b1, maybe not, you probably did it wrong. because as soon as white gets rid of the bishop on c1, it can develop naturally. We saw that in the game it went to g5, but he had to give up a bishop first. He had to make all kinds of concessions. If he can play this, he's neutralizing the pressure on the queen side, which is really what we're playing for. And that's more or less it. We're going to have to wait and sit there, and a lot of Benko players do win games like that as well, because it's very tricky. We always have active play. As soon as you come forward with white, it's also dangerous because there are so many pieces on the board. But really what Ding Liren showed in this game is that he could prevent it by very positional means. And of course, the moment the tactics started, he was a great player and he finished it off in style. Moves like king f7, quite easy to him, I imagine, but not so easy when you have to make that switch from very positional play, almost like you're not down a pawn at all, to very tactical. So this was the quiz. If you did well, good for you. If you didn't, then please have another look at the game because it's a very nice one. I'd like to just say it's not my quiz. It's part of what used to be Chess Vibes, now it's chess.com. It's written by my good Dutch friend Marijn van Delft. Before I get people asking, why didn't you give me credit? So it's not mine, but I used to work for a project that makes these quizzes, so I hope you liked it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, because it's not such an easy game to understand, I think. And yeah, thank you.